I'm Mel Stewart, and this is the SwimSwam podcast. Today, we have a powerhouse in the sport of swimming, serving on Olympic staffs from 1980 to 2004, USA National Team Director 2006 to 2010. He was in Mission Viejo, or an organization that he turned into a dynasty. He's now moving on to launch a new elite training program at Saddleback El Toro swim team. Today, we have Mark Schubert. How are you doing, buddy?
Good, Mel. Pleasure to be here.
I could talk to you for hours. I could talk to you for hours. How much time do we have?
I think we both know too much about each other.
We do know too much about each other, and I want to say this in the front end. I talked to some of my peers, and I was like, "Hey, what would you talk about?" And they were overwhelmed. They were like, "This is with Mark. This man is carrying the sport on his shoulders." In my phone, you didn't believe me, but in my phone, I have you under the heading King of Swimming. Remember that?
Yes, I do remember that, and you are always a man of humor.
You didn't believe me, but that's people have to have thumbnails. That's how they remember them. And I should say this on the outset: when I was on the national team for 10 years, and when you're on the national team and you start out as a kid and you develop over the years and you become an adult, those first few years are scary, and for me they were scary, and just being in your presence made me feel okay. And I'm sure people have told you that in the past, but it was a part of how I existed those first 3 to 4 years. Has anyone ever said that to you?
I have been known to be scary. I don't know why. I think I'm a pretty pleasant, likable guy, but that's just my opinion.
I didn't say. I'm not saying that. I said I felt secure when I was there with you. When I was a kid, I felt like I was okay. I could manage my nerves. I was solid. That's why I would always slide up and try to eat at your table. And I like being in your presence because I felt like you had control of this. And if you did, I was all right.
Well, you certainly were all right. I'll never forget that swim in Barcelona. That was fantastic.
So I'm gonna at the top. I'd like to get into your history a little bit in the past, just because I have some questions, because I haven't been able to personally ask you these questions, and it's interesting about your history. But let's at the start of this, I need to say that Bradley Schumacher, who is a buddy and a close peer, 2-time water polo Olympian, 2-time Olympic medalist. He's the director of this program, and he's executive director. And he said, "Mel, we're doing this with Schubert. He's going to head up our elite training program. He's creating a 5-year strategic plan." How did this come about, and what excites you about it?
Well, I retired from the Natadors, and I was retired for 11 days. And Bradley called me up and presented this idea, which I really couldn't turn down. I mean, being able to just coach an elite group, and everything else is kind of done for me by Tim Teeter, who's the general manager and also age group coach, and director of the program. And the support that Bradley's given me is fantastic.
It's well, he blew my phone up. He's like, he goes, "I've got news. You're going to like this." And he wanted to tell me before. He wanted to tell me, and he couldn't tell me. I'm like, "Why are you calling to tell me this? Why are you calling to try to tell me something when you can't explain it?" But he said he was excited about it, and he's like, "You got to talk to Mark." I want to talk to you about coaching philosophy and where you're at right now. And in terms of just what should athletes expect when they step on deck with you for this elite training group? Let's start there.
Well, the goal of the group is to help athletes become as good as they can be. Right now, we have quite a few outstanding high school athletes that are going to be swimming at the Junior Nationals next week. But, really we want to try to help them become as good as they want to be, and motivate them to have high goals and train toward those goals. I also often feel like a swimming coach job is to get people to do what they don't want to do. But most of these guys really want to swim hard and swim fast, and it's just really gratifying to be part of their program.
It is my experience that if I'm ever on a team with someone, or if I'm ever in business with someone, there's going to become a moment where they really get mad at me. I can smile all day. I'll be your best friend in the world. We can go a long day, but there's a point when they get really upset. And this is that moment. The moment is when they realize that the expectation is, they might've thought the work was, so big, but it turns out to be times 10 or some factor that's much higher than was in their head. And it's a realization, and they either get mad at me or they go away. Is that an experience that you've had over the years?
Well, I think it's my job, hopefully, to get them to a point where they don't get mad at me, but certainly it has been my experience. I think you have to explain why you're doing the work, how it relates to them, and what you expect of them. A lot of people say that the youth today is different. I don't find them that much different. I think what's different is coaches don't really ask enough of them. And I'm not talking about yardage, but I'm talking about intensity and the work necessary to be a champion.
When you were 23 in 1972, when you took over at Mission, is that correct?
23 years old. That's right.
23 years old. That's extraordinary. I was an age grouper throughout the 1970s, became an elite into the 80s. But, if you lived in swimming, you lived in this culture, in this swimming family, everyone knew your name. You created the dynasty. Let's see, 44, were there 44 national championship, club team national championships? Is that right?
Yeah, it was always the goal. Since I read Life magazine back in the 60s, and the article was about George Haynes in Santa Clara, it was always the goal to develop a program like that. I really idolized George. He was my hero. He was a tremendous part of my career. When I was young, I used to go up there once or twice a month and watch him run practice, and he was so gracious. But probably the highlight of my young life was when we won our first nationals in '74. George won the men and the women, and Mission Viejo won George won the men and the combined, and Mission Viejo won the women. And having been pushed in the pool with George and then standing in the locker room soaking wet and have him congratulate me was really just like a dream come true, because he was really an icon.
And you were a child. You were 25.
I was a child, no doubt about that.
You were 25. What do you know when you're 25? You don't know anything. I'm over 50 and I still don't know anything.
Well, we know what we don't know, and we know that you're always learning if you're going to be the best.
And if you're learning, you're living, and you got purpose. In the 1970s, when I was a kid, it was so the oxygen that you breathed was a lot of big names, a lot of big stars, and you were, as for a child, for me, you were it. It was Doc Councilman, my coach Frankie Bell, my age group coach Frankie Bell. She loved Doc Councilman, so I got Doc Councilman's type of training. But she would always put Swimming World in front of me and put your picture in front of me. So at the first time I went to national championships was in Mission Viejo in the early 80s. And I went hunting for you. I was trying to see all the people that I knew in the sport, from the media, and I found you, and you were there in your little red nylon shorts, which were in vogue at the time. And I just stood agape. But
the shorts were little, Mel. They were little.
They were little. When you're, this might be helpful for young coaches, but you said it, you went and you sought out George, and you sought him out as a mentor, and he allowed you on deck. What's your advice to kids who are, excuse me, not kids, young adults who are building their coaching careers into their 20s? What's the gem of wisdom from Mark Schubert?
Well, I went to University of Kentucky, and I was a history and political science major, wanting to be a lawyer. My dad said that I'd never make a living out of swimming, but I went into swimming anyway. And when I was at Kentucky, I used to go visit Doc Conselman. I used to go up to Cincinnati and visit Paul Bergen. When I moved to California, as I said, I visited George, I visited Sherm Shavor, I visited Peter Dalen and Ron Bellatory. And that's how I got my education as far as swimming is concerned. And the thing that I noticed, it wasn't just X's and O's. It wasn't just the workouts themselves. It was the personality that they put in the workout. And in a lot of cases, the psychology that they brought to the workout that would motivate the kids.
It's when a great coach asks you to do something, they do it in a way where if they say it and you know that you can do it. You might be afraid, but you know that you can do it. And a small part of you really wants to do it. I never chose to coach because I don't know that I really had that skill, but you had to develop this over time. So if you're stepping on deck and your athletes have to get after it that morning, what's something that you do when you know you're going to drop a whopper on them?
Well, I learned a lot also from Richard Quick, who was a good friend. And I remember Jenny Thompson giving a interview one time, and somebody asked her, "Why did you think you could break a world record?" And she said, "Because my coach told me I could." And that's very much like what you just said. And I think what you need to do is tell them what you think they can do, challenge them to do it. If they don't do it, tell them, well, next time you'll challenge yourself and get it done.
Do you ever have a moment with an athlete, maybe a story from your past, where you recognize the talent of this athlete? We see this all the time, decade over decade. We always see talent emerge. They sit on top of the water like a spider. They have a perfect feel. They don't have the head. Their head isn't developed yet. Do you have an example of somebody who is just an extraordinary talent, but you had to get them over the edge with their confidence?
You don't really expect me to tell you a name, do you?
I do. I expect you. I expect you to say Don Schola. No, who knows? It could be anybody. It's
well, I think the most talented athlete I've ever coached was Jesse Pasayo. He had a tremendous feel for the water, and he came with his family to Mission Viejo from Puerto Rico, and he knew he was good, but he didn't know how good. But he wasn't afraid to jump in the water and swim with Shirley Babashoff, who often would swim over top of boys that got in her way, and Brian Goodell, and challenge himself. And, I always told him he could. I told him he could be a world record holder, and he must have believed me, because he became a world record holder and one of the most dominant swimmers in the late 70s.
Pound for pound, the fastest swimmer on earth, certainly for a long period of time.
He was a tough kid, that's for sure.
I imagine he was the fastest flutter kicker in the world, hands down. It seemed like his kick was extraordinary, and I have a little bit of insight into this. It seemed like he could kick and just leave people behind.
He
on
could.
A board.
And I think that the credit for dolphin kicking went to those backstrokers in '88 that kicked all the way underwater. But Jesse was really the first one to dolphin kick. And believe it or not, his dad told him to do that because his kick was so good, told him to dolphin kick underwater before he broke out. And he just became great at that.
I trained with Sal Fasayo, his younger brother. And I beat everybody always in practice. I had to step on them, but I could not. We'd get on a board and kick, and I couldn't do it. He'd take me. I'm like, how did you, I'm like, how did this happen? Because it's boggling my mind. And he's like, I just try to stay up with my brother. I've spent my entire life trying to stay up with my brother.
Yeah, he was really something and fun to coach.
Well, I could spend we could spend hours talking about your history and talking about all of these athletes, and I can mine stories if you would share names. I appreciate you dropping Jesse on us. But you said this at the outset, and you gave me a little insight into something that's very interesting today. Where as we stand right now on the eve of 2022, a lot of people think that the philosophy of training has changed, and that athletes don't have the grit to do honest work. And what I'm hearing from you is that that's not the case. What I'm hearing from you is that this history in our sport where athletes bring their grit to the pool still exists. What makes you think that?
Well, I've coached a lot of high school kids the last 10 years, and they do what you ask them to do or try their best. And that's why I don't believe they've changed. And I think coaches need to challenge them. Just like you said, if you ask somebody to do something, they're going to do their best to do it. I think the philosophy of the sport has changed, and certainly my philosophy has changed in that the quality of the workout has changed. It's not just distance, distance, distance. It is distance for the distance swimmers, but the quality and the speed that workouts are done is amazingly better.
It seems as though in the 70s and 80s we trained in second gear, maybe third gear, all the time. And then in fits and starts throughout the season, we'd jump up and do something fast, or you'd descend down and do a few things fast. And it seems like the philosophy now is that you have to take that intensity and bring it almost on a daily basis. How much of, if I'm swimming for you, I jump in the water today and I'm 18 years old, I'm 17 years old, and I want to swim at the right college, and I want to be an elite athlete. And I swim the 400 meter free and the 400 IM, and I want to do 200 free. What's my work week look like with Mark Schubert?
Well, we train 3 mornings, school day mornings a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And we train for 2 hours. We train for 2 hours in the afternoon. We train Saturday morning for 2 hours, and we weight train 3 times a week. I think that one of my goals is to have a senior enter a good 4-year college program and not have to take a year to catch up with the rest of the team. I would like them to enter the college like a sophomore, both in the water and in the weight room.
That first year, that freshman year, is that's a cold splash of water in your face. You know what it is. I think a lot of it is you're suddenly in the water with a lot of racehorses. So the intensity goes up just because of your ego, and you're going to try and stay there and race. But the weight room kills you. You're, especially for young men. I don't have the experience of a woman, but it seems like that freshman year you're playing catch up all the time. That's interesting that you would say you want your athletes to enter their freshman year and look like a sophomore. I like that.
Well, as far as the weight training is concerned, it's not only adjusting to lifting weights, but it's adjusting to how to lift weights. And hopefully when they enter college, they've got a good strength coach that's going to teach them all those things. But there's a lot of learning that takes place. We have a great strength coach that's in our program. His name is Stan Wada, and he was a strength coach at San Diego State, and does a lot of personal training now. And he joined our team and has made a tremendous difference in the strength of our athletes.
I don't want to beat a dead horse on this topic, but I do have to share some insecurities about what I think about the sport. Before the Olympic Games, in the back of my head, I was wondering about our grit, Team USA's grit, and I measure it by our distance events. And we've got Katie Ledecky, and we perform, but on the men's side, I felt like we're not there. And I was surprised. I was surprised by, and I don't measure yards. To me, yards is the play pool. It's the kiddie pool. If you can't do it in meters, I'm a bit of an ass. I don't think you're a real swimmer. You've got to be able to maintain your body position for 50 meters and do it in all your events. Fink surprised me and inspired me. And I felt a little bit stupid. I felt like I should have known, I should have seen that coming. Did you see that coming? Did you see his performance coming?
I certainly didn't see it coming. And obviously we were all really gratified. And hopefully between Ledecky and Fink, it's going to motivate young people to be distance swimmers, and we'll be able to compete with the Europeans and the Australians in those events. It's been sad that for so many years, we were finalists, but not podium swimmers. And there's no reason for
that. Have we waned? Have we waned in terms of our building a base, since the 2000s? Have we gotten a little soft there with that background?
Well, let's face it. People that get college scholarships are people that can score in 3 individual events and swim relays. And I think when we went to 200 relays, as exciting as they are, people wanted to become 50 swimmers. And if you look at the great distance swimmers, they can sprint. They have to have speed to be successful, but they also have to train.
Mark, I wanted to be a 50 freestyler so bad.
Well, you were just a 200 flyer, Mel, and just admit it.
Wanted it so badly. It was never going to happen. Not in this universe or endless others. It's my hope that Fink and Ledecky inspire a whole new generation, and that we're not afraid of work, and that we do the work. The funny thing is that I left the sport for a while. And when I came back, I remember one of the first coaches that I saw at one of the meets, where it was just, I think I was working for Swim Network, which was USA Swimming's failed attempt at a news website. But I sat down and I was back on deck and able to talk to folks. And I look over and Greg Troy sits down. He looks at me and he goes, "Mel, I don't know if kids are doing enough work now. They're not doing honest work. Just want to let you know you're back in the sport now, but I'm not so sure. We're doing honest work." I felt like I understood that. Could you define honest work for me? What's your definition of honest work in the pool?
Well, I think if you're a distance swimmer, you have to be doing 3, 4, 5, and occasionally 6,000 yards or meters work. And you have to be doing it fast. And the term best average is probably used a little bit more than descending, although I do a lot of my sets descending. But they're fast.
And I had a conversation with Bowman once, and I said, "Hey, give me an idea of a set that I might like." And he goes, "Mel, here's a set for you: 2050s butterfly." And I might screw it up, and I'll hear from him if I do. I think it was 2050s butterfly meters off the block on the 130, and he's like, "You got to hold 200 fly pace, descending down to maybe a second 50 of 100 fly pace." And he says, "I'm looking for the wobble." He's looking for his athletes to get up on 15 and they start to wobble because it's too much. It's like, I like that. That's a fun set. I'd like to dig into that. Do you have a go-to set?
Mel, you could have done that without a doubt. Well, I like to consider myself a 400 IM coach because I think it's my job to teach people to swim 4 strokes, to teach them to do those strokes well, and to teach them to have the endurance to swim a 400 IM. I think 200 fly, 400 IM, 1650, I think those are the most challenging events. And I think if you can develop an athlete not to have fear of the 400 IM, I think you've been successful. But I remember Jesse doing 9 400 IMs, and actually Brian did it too, Brian Goodell, descending 1 to 3 on 5 minutes. And this was long course. And he went under 430 on the fast ones. And the world record at the time was 424, which he broke. But, that was an example of guys racing And as you know, Brian Goodell won the NC2As in the 400 IM 3 times in his career, but they always challenged themselves. Casey Converse was in that group too, and they were just racing their hearts out every day in practice.
It's there's a story that I really like, and it's one that Eddie Reese shares, and it's and I don't know that he shared. I think you shared it, and it was that when you were considering the position at the University of Texas to coach the women, that he met you somewhere on a connecting flight and flew with you, even though he wasn't going to that destination. He took this flight just to sit by you and talk. Is that a true story?
That is a true story, and I was amazed when he showed up on that flight. And of course, at the time, I was living in Florida, and I don't know how he got to Florida, but obviously he flew there from Texas, and then we flew back. Eddie was, even though I was a pretty established coach, Eddie was a tremendous mentor. And I learned in 4 years so much about not just training, but how to motivate people. I remember the women on that team complaining to me that we didn't have enough team meetings because the men were always having team meetings and they were always, doing 3100s. But that was Eddie getting in their head. And he not only got in their head about swimming, but he got in their head about life. I have so much respect for him.
It's that makes sense. He's sort of this person where if you go out, we're SwimSwam is based in Austin, so I'll go to dinner, and it's at a point when my wife, who's helped us launch this business, she's had enough of swimming, not a swimmer,
Yeah.
and she doesn't want to have anything to do with swimming after a certain period of time at night. We'll sit down to dinner, and Eddie Reese will sit down with his wife somewhere in the vicinity. This is a big city, but that happens a lot. So he gets into everybody's head. I can't get him out of my head.
Yeah, he's definitely a special human being, and not just a special coach, but a special human being. And I'm always impressed, always have been impressed with the quality of athletes as people that come out of his program.
In terms of the what you're doing there at your elite training group, are you going to have flexibility to bring in talent that is maybe not US based talent? Can you bring in athletes from around the world? Can you build this program? Can you build this elite training group the way you want to build it?
I think so. And it always has been my philosophy where I've accepted athletes from other countries. I have to say that, some of the most satisfying experiences with athletes is when they become Americans. I've sponsored a number of athletes who have become Americans, and how much they appreciate training in the United States and our way of life. But they create the atmosphere that I want to see as far as work. Because if you're going to sacrifice coming from your country to swim in the United States, you're into it. And, they push the Americans in my team to go fast.
In the 1970s, my understanding is that the Russian team, the Soviet team, trained at Mission. Is that correct?
Yes, it wasn't just the Soviets and the Mission kids. USA Swimming at the time wanted to improve distance swimming, and they brought all the best distance swimmers to Mission Viejo to train against each other. And that was quite a bloodbath. It was really fun.
So Saunakov on deck, huh? With you.
Saunakov was in there. I'll tell you an interesting story about Saunakov. We used to train at Mission Viejo High School in the morning, so we could train 2 hours. They'd be done at 8:00 and have to be at class at 8:15. And they complained about it, but tough, they did it. But one day we're training in the morning, and the sets and everything were going fine. Everybody was working hard. And then Saunakov got out of the water and came up to me and he goes, "Coach, is this a new American training method?" And I said, "What do you mean, Vladimir?" He goes, the water is so cold. And nobody said anything for an hour. They just worked. And it was below 70, and I did let him out. It was awesome.
Have you talked to him recently? Have you seen him recently?
I usually see him at international events because, he's a big part of their federation and their program. And we're very friendly. And, the most disappointing thing, I think, was the boycott in 1980 and not being able to see the rematch of Brian Goodell and Vladimir Saunakov.
Vladimir Saunakov looks like a Russian oligarch right now. He's about 50 pounds heavier. Smiles. I love his smile. I had him on the podcast. He was a lot of fun. But he is always interesting to talk to, and of course, he loves the sport of swimming. Vladimir Saunakov, best flip turn in the sport in history, or worst flip turn in the sport in history?
Well, let's put it this way. He was a lot better than a lot of other people during that age. I know if you look at the 1500 race in 76, the kids really laugh at the turns, the shallow push-offs, and things of that nature, not to mention the suits. So you remember the suits, right, Mel?
They were sweaters, weren't they? Now, so if anybody is young listening to this, Vladimir would flip and he wouldn't go underwater. He'd just push off and start swimming, which is mind-boggling. So that's interesting. So with this new elite training group, you're going to have the latitude to do what you want. I like that. That checks out. When you've been at a few places and you've left a few places. And when my friends have asked what's going on, I've always said, in the room, they didn't realize that Mark was the CEO of swimming. And that's always my response. It's like, and I'm making a joke out of it, but I do have how do you feel about this? In terms of our sport, I feel like there should be admin and management of our sport. And then there should be the person with knowledge who's directing what's happening in the pool. And I feel like there should be a separation. There should be some church and state. Does that make sense to you? Does that check out?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that was one of the things that was so exciting about going with Bradley Schumacher, because I work with him and I always say I work for him. And he always says, no, this is a partnership. And he really treats me like that. I know his experience as an Olympian in two sports, and he appreciates what we're doing as far as trying to develop a very high level of performance with our group.
If I'm a young athlete or I'm a parent and I'm thinking, hey, we got Mark Schubert down there in Southern California. He's got an elite training group. We need to be thinking about this. What should they do? What should their expectations be? What should their responsibilities be coming to you?
Well, the group very simply is no compromise. Attendance is expected. Best effort is expected. Knowledge is expected, where they're reaching out and trying to get more knowledge every day. And, I think they're going to get a lot faster, not just because of my presence, but because of the presence of the other great athletes. I think if there's been a secret to my success, it's been the fact that I've been blessed with a group of good athletes that push themselves.
Everybody has. Let me take a step back from that. It's really easy to judge careers by colors of medals and the star names in the sport and all of our accolades with NC2A championships, which you've had 3 NC2A team titles, and you could just go through this long list of names. But when I think about swim, I often think about, and I brought this name up before, I think about this guy, Eric Top, who never should have been a finalist at Olympic trials. The guy could barely walk. I think his best time in the 500 free was a 5:03, but he finaled. When I went to trials, he finaled in the 200 butterfly. That guy worked a lot harder than I did. No one inspired me as much as him. This guy killed himself. Do you have examples of that? where you've seen these young swimmers come in and it's like they shouldn't have achieved what they achieved, and they did it just on hard work?
Certainly, we've seen a lot of that. And sometimes we have to help them out because they're so hard on themselves, because maybe they aren't as good as they want to be. I remember probably one of the greatest swimmers I ever had the opportunity to coach was Mary T. Maher in 83 and 84, preparing for Los Angeles. And she was so hard on herself because in the 100 fly, she never could break that world record that she set when she was, I don't know, 13 or 14. But she was a tremendous worker, a great freestyler as well as flyer. And I have always had tremendous respect for her.
I got to call out a buddy of mine, a 400 IMer, Jeff Kostoff. I just got to say it. If he goes this deep into the podcast, he's going to hear this. When I asked Jeff about that 57.9 100 fly, I think it was a 57.9 by Mary T. He goes, the clock malfunction, Mel. She didn't go that fast. Nobody could go that fast. Well, I think the feeling I got was like, you're jealous.
When you skip a whole second in 100 to break a world record, everybody absolutely was in shock. I don't think she went 58 for a long time. You know, she was 59 and then she was 57.9.
And when you'd go to Olympic trials, Olympic games, mostly I would measure things by Olympic trials after Olympic trials. It was always, who's going to dip into the 205.92 200 fly? She told me something years ago, and I asked her about it decades later, and she goes, I don't remember telling you that, but it was burned into my brain. This was, I don't know if you're a religious person, but if you're not, you understand the metaphor. To me, I took it as gospel from the word of God, because it was coming from Mary T. She might as well have been a goddess of swimming. She said, if you swim fly so much and you train it so much to where it actually becomes easier than freestyle, she goes, you'll probably become a world record holder and a gold medalist. And I believed it, and I trained that way. Do you have any coaching philosophies, any nuggets like that?
Well, I'll give you a story about Mary T. Like you said, she always wanted to train fly. Every once in a while, we would have lake swims in Lake Mission Viejo, and it's a mile long. And they would go down, and then I would have them race back, and Mary T beat the rest of the team swimming butterfly in open water swim. It was absolutely amazing.
Maybe she should have added that if everybody swims freestyle in open water and you do it fly and you beat them all, you'll truly be an elite whose time lasts for decades.
Well, we had some pretty good swimmers and some pretty good distance swimmers, and everybody just talked about that for years.
Swimming's a tough sport. It's I think that but I cannot imagine the consistency and having the focus to be there on deck day in and day out as a coach forever. But it seems like it gets into your heart and you're there, and you do it. And when people do it, they do it until the end of time, their time. What is it? What is it about the sport that keeps bringing you back? What is it that's gotten into your heart?
I think that the great thing about swimming and coaching swimming is that every season is completely different. You're you're coaching different personalities. You're coaching the same personalities at different times in their career, and it's never the same. And when I get up in the morning and the alarm goes off, I'm usually thinking about my best one or two swimmers, and not that I'm not concerned about the rest, but they help me put my feet on the floor in the morning with no hesitation.
Who's your favorite swimmer of all time?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. I'd have to say Janet Evans was one. Shirley Babashoff was another. As I mentioned before, Shirley trained like a man, and if a man got in front of her, she would swim over them. She was so tough. Brian was certainly one of my favorites because he was the first gold medalist at Mission Viejo. Jesse was certainly there, and we've had a lot of champions, but they all certainly ranked right up there. Eric Namesnick was great. He was in our program when he was in high school. Lenny Kraseberg, Brad Bridgewater, all of those guys were fun to coach. I remember I had a new assistant coach one time show up at USC, and we had a guy from Hungary who had actually won the NC2As in the 200 free, and they were doing a set of 9 200s, and Brad and Lenny were staying up with him, going 143s for 200 yards backstroke while he went 143s, 200 freestyle. And the guy looked at me, and he looked at his watch, and he goes, "Is that right?" And I just said to him, "Get used to it."
You've been listening to the SwimSwam podcast. Stay tuned for new episodes every week. You can take SwimSwam podcast on the go by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform. Look for links in the description below, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos as well.